All right. Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in today's episode of Leading from Afar. I'm Scott Markovitz with my co-host Tevi Hirschhorn.
Hello.
Tevi, how you holding up these days during the last lockdown?
I'm enjoying lockdown tremendously.
I can feel, I can see, I can hear that enthusiasm.
No sarcasm, a little sarcasm, lots of sarcasm.
Quite a bit, especially if you're a parent with kids learning at home or stuck from home, like both of ours. It's quite an exciting time.
We are still improvising, holding up though.
Indeed, this is the year of improvisation. But today we're going to be doing part two of our series regarding remote compensation. And today we're going to continue to discuss the options that teams have compensating their remote employees and which one may make the most sense for your team. So today we're super excited and delighted to be joined by Rodolphe Dutel, who's the founder of Remotive, certainly one of the biggest and most active remote communities and longest standing ones. I know I've been a member of it quite a while. I know the Remotive is, I guess, part job opportunities, part Slack community, part leadership forum. There's probably some bits and pieces that I missed in there. So Rodolphe, most importantly, thank you so much for joining us today. And maybe perhaps the best place to start off is maybe introducing yourself and Remotive a little bit, please.
Of course, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. My name is Rodolphe. I fell in love with the startup world and ecosystem about 10 years ago when I started to work at Google, discovering that selling collaboration tool was a way for people to work from anywhere. So my job, fresh out of college, was to help companies transition out of Microsoft Exchange and IBM Lotus Notes and start to share documents so that you would not have to go to the office in order to be productive. And that did set me on a path towards exploring how to work differently and how to live differently. I joined a company named Buffer that does social media, whereas lucky enough to be director of operation finance for about 3 years, helping them grow from 15 to 90 employees. And discovering how a productive team of about 100 people could operate across time zone, across different countries and continents, really inspired me to share and to set myself on a quest of finding more teams that operated that way. And InVision was one of them, of course. And then I started to compile lists year after year. And fast forwarding to today, I run Remotive that I started in 2014, a community, media, and job board helping people who want to work remotely connect with companies that are excited about remote work. And we are a media, and we really like to share what it is we'll learn and to be, a good community member.
Awesome. So before maybe we dive into the actual nuts and bolts and dollars and cents, the first question I had, it was historically, obviously outside of this recent COVID year, what has the remote hiring picture looked like? Meaning that have historically companies been hiring the best talent anywhere in the world? Have they been focused more on the regions, so US only because they're a Pacific Coast-based team, or maybe something of a mix or another option?
Yeah, I feel like we had three different scenarios happening, really. The first scenario was a company trying to find someone to fill a position and basically, pay them as little as possible, which traditionally has been outsourcing or offshoring. That has happened, and that did set off a way for people in various countries to work for a company willing to outsource a task. That wasn't remote work as we define it today, but it did get started on the basis of someone outside of your office could help you join and do a task. Then we had companies that said, well, I want to hire in the country where I operate, in the United States, for instance, but I also recognize that talent is not only connected to a zip code. So maybe I want to find people outside of the San Francisco Bay Area, and I want to be expanding across all states for legal and compliance reasons. I only want to be hiring in the United States. That's the second example. And the third and last case are companies that said, well, talent is everywhere. Yes, it may be complex, but we want to take a different stance and hire the best people wherever they are. So we will be facing hurdles. We will have difficulties at times, but we're happy to welcome applicants wherever they are based, and we'll work out compensation accordingly.
Interesting.
It's a really interesting perspective. I guess on some ways you're saying that it started from outsourcing, paying less for people that could help you out that are not in your office, and then on the other hand is saying we want the best. Maybe that even costs more. So now we're at a tricky point where remote compensation is a big topic. It's easy to, when you put it that way, it's easy to see that there's that clash of perspectives there.
Yep.
What do you think is like the right way a company should go about trying to figure out salary for remote employees?
It's a tricky discussion in the sense that everyone can give you a different answer. My take on this is that what's best is transparency. What I love is what you see is what you get, meaning that from the moment you look at a company or apply, you do understand before committing to work with them that you will be paid according to either where you live or what you do, and it doesn't matter where you live. And what I want company to be sharing more is transparency, because sometimes it's going to be, a free for all where you're only going to pay so much, and sometimes it's going to be the best salary ever, like what Basecamp is doing, paying top dollar San Francisco regardless of where you're based. And I understand there are economic constraints on both scenarios. I just feel like if you get transparency from the get-go as an applicant and then employee, then you can vote with your feet, like virtual feet if you're remote, but you can do that.
So how much transparency do you see as the right mix? I know obviously Buffer, where you were, was very famous of being very transparent with salaries and a lot of other information, but I think over the time they moved away from that because there was a bit of friction, potentially internally, about the salaries. No, so you see like there's a right mix or a right place to have that transparency?
Transparency is tricky when it comes to salary because you can have either a spreadsheet with everyone's salary and everyone's name, which has implication. That's what Buffer did. And the consequence of that is saying that, well, someone is going to know how much you are paid as an individual, which may be tricky. And also salary bands is another thing. So salary bands is saying, well, for this role in this geography, this is how much you're going to get, which I think makes a lot more sense. So at Buffer, they decided to share a lot, but that was based on the fact that existing employee knew exactly that this information would be shared, and people that were not quite comfortable had the opportunity to say so and to potentially exit the structure as well before this was even implemented. So the rules were set from the get-go. I do believe that it's great to know what salary band you're going to have before applying, then going down to the granularity of, Josh is going to make that much and Sal is going to make this much. It's a bit extreme for some, and I do get that.
Interesting. So I know that you personally, obviously, through Remotive, have been very up in the forefront of that transparency around remote salaries. Probably, I think the last maybe 2 or 3 years, you've done the developer salary guide, where you've actually posted on social media for developers to post anonymously how much they're making, broken down by location and seniority and things like that, which is obviously quite interesting to have it because I haven't seen, I don't know if any other opportunities or places online where you can kind of get that data. But kind of 2 questions off of that of, one, where'd that idea come from to actually start doing that? And so far, what have you seen in that data that's been pushed on through so far?
I think it's interesting to see that most salary band and compensation data are traditionally linked to a geography. You want to know how much developers are making in Boston, for instance. But the reality is, if you say, well, the world is flat and I want someone who's great as a senior developer in JavaScript, maybe you want to be benchmarking yourself against your peers, meaning people that are working in similar sized startup with similar number of years of experience versus someone who's your neighbor. And I think that finding that granularity wasn't really easy. So crowdsourcing felt like the most natural way to do it. So I asked around and I said, well, how about, we can anonymously share salaries from developers especially, and share how many years you've been on a job, what kind of pay you're getting, and how you feel about that pay as well. So I felt like combining that has been interesting. And to date, I think we have nearly 1,000 entry, I would think. So it's always an instant picture, like a snapshot of the market, and market are dynamic. You also get, someone in fintech is often paid more due to the industry than someone working in, events, for instance. It's just the nature of the industry that shifts a little bit. So it's not always apples to apple, but at least to give you a sense of, say, I'm based in such city in Berlin in the US, and I sort of Berlin in Germany, and I know how much other remote developers based in Germany are commanding in the market. So it's just one more reference point. It's not absolute, but I felt like it was lacking in the landscape.
What's your thoughts as a remote leader? What's your opinion on the ideal scenario? Should somebody be paid for their experience, or should it be linked to their geography somehow? And what do you think are the implications for morale in a company?
I think the most important thing is making sure that you don't have second-class citizen in a way that you don't create two-tier system, because that tends to be very tricky and even toxic at times, where you have people at HQ and then a bunch of other people that are in a different country altogether, and there's somewhat of an understanding that it's been chosen upon budget, more of a CFO decision rather than an absolute decision. I do believe that my preference is for everyone to get the best salary for their skills. So should a startup be able to afford that, that's great. But I also understand that startups and companies in general sometimes are able to pay less, but they can still provide a good living for people that are happy to grab this opportunity. So I want to see both ends of the spectrum. And if you are a well-funded startup and you do manage, to provide good salary, I think that expanding it is absolutely the thing to do. And one thing I always say that when you get 3 employees in a room, being virtual or physical, if they have a couple of beverages, you just leave them chatting for 2.5 hours, everybody is going to know how much the other person is making. It's just natural. Like, they're going to chat at some point, and compensation maybe is going to take a few weeks, but it's going to get known. It's not such thing as a big secret behind how much everybody is going to be making.
Yeah, that's great. I think it's right in line with Tevi and I spoke about in the last episode in part 1 about. I'm getting the feeling that obviously you're going down the best option is the global salary. You're obviously paying for the experience versus location. But one of the thoughts is something that you had said. And I mentioned it in the last episode. Is do you feel that there's a use case to have obviously based on location or some other basis, especially kind of in the life cycle of the company, of an early stage company with maybe 5 people with pre-seed funding. For 100K for a San Francisco developer, you may be able to get 2 developers just as good in Eastern Europe or somewhere else. Is there a use case that you see that, okay, this is the best model to go at this point or in this specific use case?
I think it's pretty tricky because, as you said, like early stage company development can vary dramatically depending on how you're going to allocate that 100K budget. And I do feel like historically companies in like GAFAs and Fortune 500 have been very much hub-centric. You had a hub in San Francisco, in Tel Aviv, in London, and it is very natural and almost second nature to them to pay you according to where you are, because they used to pay in local contracts. So as soon as they swapped currency and visas, they changed how much you made depending on location and location bands. So from a big corporation standpoint, shifting compensation when you shift location offer higher, and you can see that through like newly decided new decisions from the big corporations, the Facebooks of the world, it's been very natural. And at the same time, if you're a small company, you can have 2 developers. That's a discussion I think that's nice to be had with the team, and also understanding that maybe you're going to be able to get top tier talents that have a different salary expectation, and maybe you do not want to compete with other things. Typical example is someone who's fresh out of college in the Bay Area, maybe commanding a salary that anyone else in other regions or areas will find outrageous. Like, would you pay a fresh graduate 250 with like $1,000 with stock options included to get started with someone who's got very few experience aside from projects? I think that's a biased view of the market. So I want to be fair and say that ideally I'd love everyone to get top dollar, but I also want to say that the base camp scenario where you pay top dollar everywhere is a scenario where you have a SaaS business that's basically unbreakable and that is making over $50 million a year for a team of 50 people. So when you have that kind of margin, you can make decisions that are different. Sure. Many SaaS businesses can do that. Not all businesses can do that. So it's hard for me to give a blanket answer because economic reality are going to be tricky here.
Yeah, it seems obviously from the leaders that you've spoken to, do you have any sense of why a company chooses a specific model and potentially why they may pivot? I think there's obviously been use cases. Buffer, I think, was an example that, from what I remember, started off with a localized option and moved towards, I think, a peg towards San Francisco, and then moderated from there. Help Scout also started with a localized salary and then moved to a global salary last year. Any thoughts on why a company would change midstream and how these companies are making that decision?
I feel like most leaders that make decisions around compensation have two things in mind. First, they want to improve the status quo, and second, they don't want to rock the boat. Rocking the boat means, to be very specific, anytime someone knows there's going to be a salary change, like in the model or in actual numbers, it's a sheer sense of panic that's going to go through the Slack room or the remote team. Like I've been in a position of being one of the people in charge of adjusting buffer salary formula, and it is very tricky for people that took out loans, that adjusted the lifestyle on a given salary to get told we're going to change the salary formula, because direct implication is you're going to make a different number. So if you work under the baseline scenario that you're going to grandfather in, meaning maintaining baseline pay of what you get today, what you get tomorrow is more than what you get today, then you can have a conversation. That's the company is doing well scenario. Where you want to adjust it to be more liberal and sort of shift it up and down as people make different life choices, then it brings more friction and more tough conversation. It's not impossible, it's just a very different framework. So Buffer, HelpScout, and others, my sense is, I'm not privy to every conversation, but every time they shift, they grandfather everyone, and basically the new reality is going to be better than the last. So that gives you a sense of comfort, and you can sort of move things from there. So you find a new model, maybe you say, well, now we're going to have a countrywide instead of a statewide policy in the US, but based on the fact that nobody's going to lose.
It's an interesting perspective of the thought of it being on whether the company is doing successfully or maybe having a little bit of trouble and potentially shifting from there. And one could make the assumption if the employee knew that the company wasn't doing as well, potentially being more open to a salary change. But again, that's a conversation for each individual person. But going forward, are you seeing, obviously through the data, through Remotive, through the job site and the salary guide information, are you seeing any trends shifting towards one model? I think Reddit have gone to a global option, Facebook the opposite of localized. Are you seeing any trends in the big picture moving any direction?
My sense is that we're going to see a two-gear system with specialized job, and high margin startups will probably capture best talent by offering great packages. So you're going to get more perks, great ergonomics setup in your house, great salary, and so on and so forth. Whereas other jobs that have been maybe required less qualification and needed people to be in certain geographical areas are probably going to shift towards lower salary band as well. So I feel like some part of potentially lower skill jobs will shift to be paid a little bit less in different countries, whereas, for instance, software developers and that part of tech is probably going to be getting better and better offers wherever they live. So I think the market is going to shift a little bit that way.
Yeah, it's an interesting point you raised before about the size of the company, like a SaaS model that's got a certain margin, 50 million ARR, being able to afford a global salary. I could also see, Scott, you mentioned Facebook. I could see things going in a similar direction. Once you're at a certain size, you're a huge corporation like Facebook, you can't really go global either. You have to go back into a more localized salary. Do you see any of those finance calculations becoming standardized where it's accepted that certain size companies will operate a certain way?
I sense that companies that had any level of success being a global company operating on localized salaries are probably going to remain that way, I think. Maybe they're going to make exception for highly senior software development / leadership position, but I do feel like they have a track record as if you maybe VP of compensation at Facebook, probably had 30 years in the industry of going through the list of localized pay is working well for me and my people. Then we have newcomers. We have the Deal, the Papaya, the Remote.com, the Oyster. So people that are doing employer of record that are going to make it easy for those companies to hire internationally. So that's where things may change from a legal and operation standpoint. It's easier to hire anywhere. But I wonder, aside from top talent, whether those large companies are going to be giving, great salaries anywhere. I think it's going to be very much restricted to those hard-to-hire positions.
Do you think that, touching on that, let's say someone was a VP of somewhere in San Francisco making 300K, and then they moved to Bolivia, should their salary be adjusted to where they are? Is there any scenario where adjusting a salary because somebody moved would make sense or be a good idea for a company?
It's really hard not to lose talents when you adjust salaries down. Like, I think you can argue it both ways. If you're a VP, you can say, I give a certain value to the company who's happy to foot my salary at 300K per year. So if I move elsewhere and provide you the same level of service, where would it go down? Tricky. But the opposite can be argued. I'm a developer in Bolivia, and I make a great contribution to what's happening. So why don't I make those 300K as a senior developer working for Bolivia? And it may happen for specific jobs, but I don't think it's going to go towards all jobs.
Interesting. I like the word that you used, value. And I think that Tevi and I spoke about that a lot in the last episode as well, that people should be paid for the value they're bringing into the company, regardless of where you are. If you're giving in a certain level of productivity, of value, of revenue to the company, that's what you're paid on, again, versus where you are. But it'd be interesting, again, as we move forward. I think, version 2 of remote is, for me, sadly, going to be the hybrid model. Again, we're going to be a whole nother episode on this. But what are your thoughts on how the hybrid model may affect the salaries for remote employees?
I think remote is going to be like, with the hybrid model, it's unclear what remote may mean. Maybe you're going to have the Stripe model where people work in offices and then you have a remote hub. So some people are 100% remote, but sometimes they go back to given location. That's one hybrid model. Second hybrid model is, okay, so you tie to, I'm French, I'm in Paris, France. So you tie to Paris office. You can be wherever you like 3 days per week, but I want to see you every Monday and Tuesday. So those things sort of sort compensation by themselves, because then you get a regional hook and a place where you connected versus, I'm remote, but sometime I'll travel for the occasional get together to the closest office you have. So I think it's going to wonder whether it's dealt with locally, which I think, that's my hunch, how big tech is going to handle it is the second model, where you're going to have some flexibility depending on your role, but you'll be anchored into a regional hub. I feel like that's the easiest for them. Let's not forget they've overinvested in real estate and training. Most of those GAFA companies, they build campuses. Like, the word is evocative of the continuity of the higher education model, where after college you go to the campus. And I think a significant number of graduates are going to be willing to see colleagues face to face and to get mentorship and to meet their husband and wives, or just interact some more by seeing people and going back to the office as well. So I think it's unclear how it's going to be computed, but I feel like those headquarters still going to have values. I think Dropbox called them the interactive studio or something like this. But basically, we're moving towards shifting big buildings into large co-working space that are more flexible. When I was working in London 11 years ago, I had to book my desk by the half day working in a consulting firm. So I had to book for Friday morning if I wanted a desk. I could not get a desk by myself, and that was true for all seniority aside from top directors. So I think that's going to be more and more what's going to happen. Hot desks with collaboration spaces, and then you work out of a hub and you connected with your salary towards that hub.
Interesting. I think that's the office idea is kind of quite in line also of things that we had spoken about. But maybe kind of a question into that of, let's say, 2 employees that live in Paris or live close to Paris, one that will come to the office or to the hub a certain amount of times a week, and one that is completely remote, doesn't come to the office. Do you see any difference in the potential salary each one of those paid and the benefits? Meaning, potentially the company may have paid for a metro pass or a bus pass, or had a gym membership, or paid for coffee and snacks and treats and things at the office. Is there the idea of putting some of that money towards the remote employee as well, or just, okay, we're spending $1,000 on an employee every month who are coming to the office for transportation, food, and snacks. But if you're not coming to the office, well, you're missing out on the craft beer and fruit and snacks and things in the office.
I think a head of HR would probably typically say yes, you need to match the remote experience to the in-office experience. I think the CFO in a crisis environment, 2021, 2025, may have a different answer. Maybe we just managed to cut that office we do not want to pay down in the first place, and that's been great savings. So I wonder how flexibility is going to tie into the economic outlook that we have, which isn't great for most companies. Certainly, software companies that are very impacted by what we're discussing here are faring better than others. But I do wonder what's going to happen. My belief that it is necessary that you accompany people that are outside of the office, and the discussion around the title of director of remote that we've seen happen with Facebook and other places, for me, it's not so much about deciding whether I should have a 20 or 25-inch screen to look at, but rather, if I work remotely, am I going to get passed on for a promotion because I haven't been seen by the higher up for quite some time? And I think that's what's going to be the tricky part of 2020, 2025 when it comes to career management in hybrid setups.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we're having a hybrid model discussion, I think the whole reason a company wants to have snacks in an office is to get people to come to the office. There's still always going to be that tug. They want people to be seen or to mix or to socialize or have water cooler conversations, which I don't believe happen as frequently as people think they do. But why would they want to give that snack an incentive to stay home? It seems like that would be something like, you want the snacks and craft beer, then come to the office.
That's a tricky thing. Maybe they'll do that. Maybe they'll just say, we'll pay for you to come over once every so often, and then we'll foot the bill for, say, $1,500 of you setting up a place in your house or apartment to be comfortable with headphones and quality internet.
Right.
That's where I'm hoping things go. It's the question about the future of the offices or the hybrid model. The one point that you made of, obviously, is someone going to be able to move up the management chain by not being seen by managers. Another thought that I have, it's especially early on when they do these virtual happy hours or meetings with the hybrid model, the management team will make a lot of effort to make it collaborative and engaging for everybody. But if you can just imagine yourself sitting there behind a computer screen, seeing 50 people in a kitchen space having a good time and drinking and schmoozing and laughing and things like that, and you're sitting on a screen all by yourself in an apartment, how does that affect the employee happiness and engagement? My own thoughts, it's going to create two cohorts. You're in the office group and you're out of the office group. That it's us versus them. And then how does a company deal with that? So maybe we'll have you back on another podcast to discuss the hybrid model. But one kind of follow-up or maybe one of the last questions that I have, it's after the developer salary guide that you have, any plans to extend that to other roles, product people, support, executives, everything else that obviously the jobs are offered on the site?
I think it'd be great. I think that we want to be crowdsourcing more data in 2021. It's been good with a lot of developers because it's a cohort that tend to be overrepresented on social media, so very responsive to share information, and that has traveled well. I do feel like we don't have solid sources of data for other jobs that have been popular. We have tons of jobs, remote jobs we list for project manager, for designers, and customer success, for instance. So we'd love to complement that effort, yes.
Rodolphe, it was very nice to meet you. Thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure having the conversation.
Thank you so much, David Scott.
Excellent. Yeah. Thank you so much again for joining us. And we'll put all the links in the show notes to the salary guide and the Remotive site, and how people can get more information about joining the Slack community and leadership group. But again, yes, thank you so much, everybody, for the conversation. And until next time.